Africa's fiscal challenges, with lower revenues hurting the country's purse. Now, revenue collections for 2022 and 2023 are now projected at 1.6 trillion rand, down by 57 billion from the projections made in the February budget. To unpack more on Minister Godongwana's midterm policy statement, we're joined by Pieter, Faber, tax executive at the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, Saica. Pieter, just looking at this particular budget, some of the key points that you've picked up that you are impressed with going into 2024.
Well, I think the impressed with is a very short list, and I think the minister noted in his own words, they were warned and the risks have now materialized. I think that's where we are. We are again back where we have an acknowledgement, so that's maybe an upside of where we are and what's going wrong, and everything that has been asked of them, they are now proposing, making the government smaller, for example. So whether that will materialize is, I think, a totally different question.
We listened to the minister saying he's going to widen the relief grant, and those members that are going to be receiving it are more than 22 million now. Where do you think the revenue can come from in terms of tax collection for this?
Well, the minister doesn't envisage much tax collection. You heard him saying about 15 billion. Now, 15 billion is essentially an adjustment basically to bracket creep. So bracket creep is where we adjust our taxes for inflation. And if you just don't do that for 1 year, you'll get about 15 billion, which means our medical credits and our personal income tax liabilities will probably increase by inflation over the next. And I think that was the concern, is taxes. He doesn't envisage taxes covering these expenses. It is quite clear it is debt, our debt burden growing from 70% of GDP to 77%, or as just over 6 trillion rand in debt. So that's about, in the medium term, about 1.8 trillion rand in additional debt. That's what's going to fund this.
The minister speaking to that debt in terms of going cap in hand to the market to try and find more money. Does this not leave him in a precarious position going into the election year, going into that budget in February?
Well, I think certain things, whether an election makes them do funny things, they haven't done things they've been warned about for quite some time. And I don't think it's going to change quite clearly. They're seeing debt as the only way to relieve. But it's unsustainable. At some time, it's going to crashing down. We did some analysis, for example, on net loan debt for the last 15 years versus cash on hand. And we also talk about the cash crunch. Well, for the first time in 15 years, the net loan debt has exceeded, the balance as of end of February 2023 has exceeded net cash on hand. So I think that is some of the metrics we're now seeing, that we're being painted into a corner, and the only answer is a debt hangover or seeing more debt as the solution. The minister does not seem to have answers to actually answer the questions that he's posing regarding solving the problems that he acknowledges they've been warned about.
There is that acknowledgement, but just how much growth does the country need to have at least enough of a tax base to still get income tax going up in the next few years?
Well, from previous projections, we know we probably need anywhere between 5 and 6% economic growth. But if you saw the review, the minister says there was a scenario A and a scenario B. Scenario A being the really bad news was we were going to have a regression of about minus 0.7%. The good news apparently was, no, we probably have growth of about 0.6% in the medium term. But neither of those will lead to enough growth. It's way below the 6% we need. So neither of those will actually save us. And I think that is where the minister's looking at logistics, electricity is so concerning, because he's talking about fixing things, not about expanding things. And I think we can't grow the economy by fixing and maintaining things. We need to grow the economy by expanding Transnet, by expanding Eskom, by expanding the harbors. That's how you are going to trigger growth.
How do you think the investors or people outside of South Africa looking at this particular midterm and some of the numbers that the minister has spoken about, are they optimistic in bringing back the capital to South Africa?
Well, I think investors are sometimes fickle things in that they look at different metrics. So for each body, there's an opportunity to make money somewhere. It's not necessarily that it's always in the interest of the country where those people are making money. Take, for example, South African bonds. Those interest rates have gone through the roof. So buying them makes quite a good investment at some point in time. It just means we're paying so much more as taxpayers to cover debt that incidentally by 2026 will have an interest cost of 466 billion rand. So do investors see it? Yes, I think there are some that are looking at some of these things as opportunities. For example, if you are there to fix and maintain infrastructure, you see an opportunity. However, if you are going to start a business that is reliant on this infrastructure or the expansion thereof, you might start asking other more harder questions, and as well as the risk to political stability when things like our presidential work plans and the expanded grants come to an end. What happens then?
Now, there could be somebody sitting at home and saying, what does this all mean for me? I know the law does also obligate Parliament to hold public hearings on the fiscal framework. What do you think households should be more concerned about, given the information that we've gotten today?
Well, I think they should be very concerned that Parliament has not held Treasury accounts, because I think people forget it's actually Parliament that is so-called pulls the purse and actually dispenses the money. It's not Treasury. Treasury just proposes the plan. It is Parliament that has accepted Treasury's plan as is. It is Parliament that has approved the appropriations bills and the expanded debt. So I think that is where people should be worried, is that Parliament is not doing its job. So I've just been reading some of the budget recommendation reports that Parliament does on each department, and they have to prepare before they finish off the medium-term budget policy statement. And what is concerning about those reports is, for example, if you look at water and sanitation, Parliament would congratulate water and sanitation of meeting 92% of its targets and saying, job well done. And the first key metric on there is having to get rid of 10,000 pit toilets, and what they've met during the year was 0. Not 1, not 2, 0. Yet we have a Parliament that says job well done. Well, how can it be a job well done, given that legacy? So I think that to me is a concern, that more pressure should be on from the people on Parliament to start getting its house in order and doing its job of approving what only is in the interest of the country.
And what would be a decent budget for you in 2024, given the information that we got from Minister Kodongwana today around the shortfall in revenue of 57 billion? What would he say next year that would give you an optimistic outlook into the medium term?
Well, I think the first thing that we've been raising is I would want to see a budget that actually has all the expenses in it. That was the concern in this year's February budget. It didn't have. You saw comments from, example, commenters like Michael Sachs saying Eskom's debt relief was not in the budget, it was actually in the debt. And the minister alluded to a new financing structure to take over municipal debt, etc. That's the concern. They're actually hiding the expenses, and there are a few others of legal liabilities, etc. So I would like to see, firstly, that we have a budget that is actually credible, that has all the expenses. If we have, for example, budgeted for wage increases, don't tell us you're budgeting for 0 when you know the unions will never accept that. So budget for what you think they really will accept. So that's the first thing I want to see, and I think most investors want to see a credible budget. One that has all the expenses in and that is estimating things at credible values. So don't tell us you're stabilizing debt when you're coming up with all sorts of debt reliefs, etc., and you know that revenue. Give us a credible budget on proper numbers that includes all the expenditure, and I think then that is a starting point for us to then look at where we should then allocate or not, and to which to prioritize. But give us a credible budget to start off with.
All right, more transparency is what Pieter Faber is calling for. It's, of course, the tax executive at Saica.